Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer Hoglund. I'm here on behalf of the Calgary Horticultural Society. Today is the third and final part in a series on growing fruit in Calgary and area gardens. So in our first video we spoke about tree fruit, our second video we talked about shrub fruit, and today we're going to talk about the remaining fruit. So that's ground fruit, brambles, and vines. So we're going to go through each of the types of fruit that grow well here, give a little bit of description, talk about what they're used for, and any little tips for growing here in Calgary. And then we're going to give you some varieties that do really well here. So without further ado, we are going to start by listing the fruit we're going to talk about. So we're going to start with ground fruit. This includes strawberries and rhubarb. I know rhubarb isn't technically a fruit. However, we're going to cover it here because it's usually used as fruit when eating. And it is called pie fruit, so technically we can't not cover it when we talk about fruit. Then we're going to move on to our brambles. This is raspberries. We're going to have a quick note about blackberries in there as well. And then we're going to speak on vine fruit. That's kiwi and grapevines. Yes, we can grow kiwis here in Calgary. All right, so first up is strawberries. Strawberries are probably the most popular fruit to grow here in Calgary and area, and that's because they taste a million times better when we grow them at home rather than purchasing them at the grocery store. They're small plants, they don't require a lot of room, they're easily grown in pots and containers, which is great for those of us without a lot of growing space. However, they can be a little bit more challenging to overwinter in containers. So keep in mind, we may have to treat them as annuals if we have smaller containers for them to grow in. If they're in the ground, they're fine and they will come back year after year as perennial plants. So strawberries reproduce by runners. Those are longer stems that grow out away from the plant and then form roots and leaves at the tip. So those roots establish in the ground and form into a brand new baby plant. So this is good for us because strawberries aren't the longest lived plants. They tend to go about 3 years with good production, and then after that third year, they really reduce how many strawberries they produce. So what most people do is just grow new plants after they've dropped off in production. So we can use the plants we have and allow them to grow runners and produce new plants for us. Something to keep in mind, if our plants are producing runners, they will produce less fruit. Okay, so if we don't need new plants, then it's a good idea to cut those runners off. Another thing with strawberries is that there's a reason they're called strawberries. In the past, farmers would use straw as a mulch underneath the plants. That wasn't only a good idea in the past, it's a good idea for you to do in your garden too. That straw does a lot of good things for our strawberries. First of all, it keeps the fruit up off the soil, so it's not touching the soil directly. That's good because it reduces how quickly they rot and prevents any mold or any other pests or diseases from getting onto the fruit itself. That means we can keep them on the vine longer and allow them to sweeten up. The other thing that straw does is it keeps moisture in our soil, just like any other mulch. Okay, so that reduces the amount that we have to water. It also breaks down into organic material, which is fantastic for our soil, especially our quite clay Calgary soils. Okay, and it also prevents temperatures in the soil from getting too high or too low. It just regulates it. So benefits of mulch, straw mulch particularly, fantastic for strawberries, and you should be using that as well. All right, varieties of strawberries I'm going to go into. So besides the regular modern strawberries that we're going to talk about in a second, there's a few other types and varieties of strawberries that you will find in garden centers and nurseries. Okay, the first of these is alpine strawberries. These are a little bit smaller than our regular strawberries. They don't produce runners, something to note about them. They are red on the outside, just like regular strawberries, but they're white on the inside. The other thing with alpine strawberries is they do need some shade, okay? So fantastic for growing under trees and shrubs. Wild strawberries are another type of strawberry. These are the ones that are native to Alberta. You'll find them lots of times in our forests, especially up in the mountains. They're really teeny tiny strawberries, but they pack a big punch of flavor. Okay, really tasty. And these guys work really well as a ground cover as well. Very dense, okay, very good for ground cover in the landscape. Pine berries is another thing that we're seeing more and more of in our nurseries and garden centers. These are a wild strawberry hybrid. They're usually white, and they have a quite distinctive pineapple flavor. That's why they're called pine berries, actually. Very interesting. Try one if you get a chance. So the regular modern strawberries are divided up into 3 groups based on when they produce. All right, you can definitely have more than one of each category in a bed. You can mix them up as much as you want. Not a problem with that at all. So the June-bearing strawberries have one very large crop in around June. This is really good if you are into preserving or large batch baking, as all of them are ripe at the same time, okay? And you get a large amount at that one time. Day-neutral strawberries spread out their production throughout the entire summer, okay? So you get a really long time frame in which you can pick ripe strawberries. Ever-bearing strawberries have 2 crops per year, one in about June and one in about August. However, a little bit lower yields, okay? So not huge crops like the June-bearing ones, smaller crops, just one in June and one in around August. Okay, one other quick tip with ever-bearing strawberries is they tend to have softer fruit than the other varieties. Okay, moving on to rhubarb, one of my favorites. A lot of us grew up with rhubarb. Okay, as previously mentioned, rhubarb is actually a vegetable, not a fruit. We eat the stems of the rhubarb plant, just like with celery. Rhubarb is one of the hardiest plants in our gardens, pretty much indestructible once established. I have dug up rhubarb plants, left them on rocks, run over them with the car and truck, really abused my poor rhubarb plants, and they have continued to grow for me year after year. So can't go wrong with rhubarb in terms of hardiness. The most common variety that we see in garden centers is Canada Red. That's almost solely the other one. Sometimes you can find Valentine or German wine. Those two are a little bit pinkier color, like the picture on your left-hand side. And every once in a while, you'll find a green-stemmed variety. Not as pretty in my opinion, though. All right, so rhubarb is very, very hardy. At least a zone 2. They are very, very easy to grow, not picky about soil, do need a little bit of water, but not crazy amounts, and they'll even take a little bit of shade. So pretty much whatever plot that you have to grow in, rhubarb will grow there. Rhubarb is one of the first things to be ready to pick early in the spring, and you can also do a second harvest later in fall. The key with rhubarb is not to pick too much all at once. So about a third to about a half of the plant you can pick at one time. Okay, we need to leave some leaves on there so that the plant can still photosynthesize and continue to grow, especially in the fall when it's trying to save some energy for getting through our winter times. All right, one thing to really keep in mind, the leaves of rhubarb are poisonous, so we really want to cut off all of the leaf. Keep those leaves, though, fantastic in our compost bins, okay? Really good as compost. The other thing to keep in mind is we'd like to prune out the flowers. So if you see any stems starting to form a big white kind of paper wrapped bulb on the end of them, those are the flowers beginning to form. And if you cut those stems out, the plant will produce more stems for you and allow you to pick more. All right, moving on from rhubarb Next things we're going to talk about is raspberries. So raspberries are a bramble. They have perennial roots that last year after year, and annual or biennial canes. So those are the stalks that come up, and they last either 1 or 2 years depending on the type of raspberry they are. Raspberries are thorny, so when working with them, gloves are a great idea, really thick gloves. Raspberries are actually not a fruit. They're considered a drupe. So each little tiny bump, if you're looking at the pictures of the raspberry there, each one of those little bumps on the fruit is the fruit. All together, the bumps all together in one are called a drupe. Okay, they're kind of like a conglomerate of fruits. You can tell that raspberries are ripe when they have reached the desired color for that variety, but also when they're very easy to pull off the receptacle. All right. Raspberries are one of the most cost-effective things to grow yourself. In the grocery store, if you've ever bought raspberries, you will know they are very expensive, very fragile, don't last very long, and don't travel well. So a really big benefit is for us to grow them in our garden, where we can pick fresh, ripe, plump, juicy, sweet raspberries throughout the year. Raspberries tend to sucker quite a bit, quite a lot actually. So you really need to watch where we plant them in our yard and make sure they are not infringing on our neighbors if our neighbors do not also want their own patch of raspberries. That suckering habit also makes them really good though to produce more of. So if you want an additional patch or you would like to gift a patch of raspberries to a friend, it's very easy just to dig up one of those suckers, okay? Dig them back to the main plant as far as you can, clip them off, pull them out and plant them in your new patch. All right, so varieties for raspberries. There are two main categories of raspberries, and they differ in when they produce berries as well as when we prune them, okay? If you're going to plant more than one category from more than one of these two categories, it's a good idea to plant them in separate patches. It can get very confusing how and when, which canes to prune if you have them mixed up, okay? Just a little tip there. So the first category are Floricane or summer-bearing raspberries. These are biennial canes. That means they live for 2 years. So the first year, a cane will sprout from the root and produce leaves. The second year, that same cane will produce berries. Okay, the third year, that cane will die. So in terms of pruning, what we need to do is either prune out those second year canes in the fall after they have finished producing for the year, or we can wait and prune out those canes the next spring. Okay, they'll be very brown and dry looking and look quite dead actually. They're really easy to identify then and prune out. We just cut them right off at the base where they come up from the soil. Okay, pruning like this allows us to get extra room so that our roots can put up new and more canes. It also helps reduce the amount of suckering. If there's room right above the roots, then the plants will use that room instead of trying to find new room or more room to put up canes. All right, the second category of raspberries are the primal canes. These are also called fall-bearing raspberries. These canes are annual. So the first year they'll put up a cane, produce leaves and fruits all in 1 year, and then die off the second year. Okay, so once again, we can prune them out the end of the first year when they are done producing, or we can wait until early spring the second year and cut down the canes then. Okay, the issue with primal cane or fall-bearing raspberries is that they can be prone to early fall frosts. Because they ripen later on in the year, sometimes they do get caught by those frosts before they're fully ripe. All right, I've listed black raspberries as a separate category here. They're technically Floricane because they're biennial. However, they do have a little bit different of a growing pattern. They tend to be less hardy. Most of them are zone 4. They're dark purple or black, and they're non-suckering. Okay, so instead of sending out suckers, black raspberries grow very, very long canes that tip over, and those tips, when they touch the ground, produce roots. That's how they propagate. Okay, so we not only have to cut out second-year canes when they're done producing, but oftentimes we have to cut back the tips or the tops of the canes with black raspberries. Okay, black raspberries are typically less hardy, usually a zone 4, and quite hard to find. So if you're up for a challenge, that's worth doing. But otherwise, Floricanes are the ones that have been around the longest. Boyne is probably the oldest of all of the varieties. Standard, been around forever, and super duper hardy. Saurus is actually an improved version of Boyne. So a little bit less susceptible to diseases, and a little bit better flavor than Boyne. Still super hardy though. Red Mammoth is quite drought tolerant and has really big yields. Red Bounty has probably the highest yields of all of the varieties, very hardy as well. Fall Gold, as you can tell by the name, is a golden color and it has a very, very mild flavor. Primocane varieties, Heritage has a very large berry and is nice and sweet. Quick note about blackberries. Blackberries tend to not be very hardy here in Calgary. Most of them are zone 4, 5, or higher. If you have your mind set on trying blackberries, however, there is one variety that I have heard of doing decently well, and that's Chester. So if you want blackberries, look for Chester to start off with. All right, moving on to kiwis. So there are 3 different types of kiwis out there. One we are all familiar with from the grocery store. That's called commercial kiwi. Those are the brown fuzzy ones that we find in stores. But there are 2 other varieties as well. Hardy kiwi is actually not quite hardy enough for here in Calgary. Hardy kiwi is hardy to zone 5 and above usually. I have seen a couple of those in greenhouses here in Calgary. So make sure when you're purchasing, you check the label. We do not want hardy kiwi, not hardy enough for here. What we want is Arctic kiwi, okay? Arctic kiwis are hardy down to zone 3, okay, which is good enough for here in Calgary. So Arctic kiwi, the fruit is about thumb size, so quite a bit smaller than the commercial ones. It's also green, not brown, and it has no fuzz on the outside. Arctic kiwis grow in bunches, kind of like grapes. All right, so the leaves of Arctic kiwi, especially the males, are quite ornamental, as you can tell by the picture here on the right. This is a male kiwi. They get pink and white edges on the leaves at the same time that they flower to help attract pollinators. So really useful in our landscapes in an ornamental fashion as well. One of the best things about Arctic kiwi here in Calgary is it is one of the only vines that will grow in shade. There are a couple clematis that will grow in shade, but not very many of them, just a few. And when people ask for a vine in a shady spot for their yard, kiwi is actually the first thing I recommend to them. Okay, like I mentioned, beautiful ornamental value and vine for shade. So kiwis are a vine. They do require a trellis. Okay, they are also very picky about being moved. They do not like it and will let you know. So when you bring it home from the greenhouse, make sure you plant your kiwis in their forever home right off the bat. You can tell kiwis are ripe when they fall off the vine. But they will also ripen off the vine. So you can cut the fruit before they're fully ripe and bring them inside and let them ripen on your counter. This is a really good idea if we're going to get a hard frost, to cut off the fruit that we have, bring them inside, let them ripen. They don't do well with the frost. All right, so kiwis that are available here in Calgary and area need both a male and a female plant to get fruit. Okay, some varieties are sold as only females, some as only males, some varieties as both male and female plants. And there are some out now that have both varieties, a male and a female, grafted onto one stem. Okay, so be very sure that you check your labels when you're purchasing and make sure you have a male and a female in some form, either two plants or both grafted onto one. So Arctic Beauty is a variety that is most available here in Calgary. It comes in both the male and female, and I've seen it, Arctic Beauty grafted onto, male and female grafted onto one. This is a really hardy variety, and it actually starts producing earlier on in its life than some of the other ones. So many Kiwi take 2 to 5 years before they will start producing. Arctic Beauty is earlier than that. So a really good trait of this variety. Frost is also a very hardy variety. It only comes as a female. September Sun is another one that only comes as a female. And September Sun also has a little bit later blooming and fruiting than the other varieties. Okay, so we really need to watch with frosts, early fall frosts with that one. Pasha is a male only variety, and it is one that has very, very colorful leaves. So if you're looking for a kiwi to use in an ornamental fashion, Pasha is one you want to look for. Victor, can't find this one very often. It's quite rare. However, if you do find it, snatch one up. They have quite a bit larger fruit size, which is great. They come in both a male and a female variety. Even though it's a male name, Victor can also be a girl. Assay is a newer one that I've just started seeing out in nurseries. It's a self-pollinating variety, so you don't have to worry about the male and the female with Assay. However, it is less hardy than the other ones. It's a zone 4, so keep that in mind when you're looking for Arctic kiwi. Okay, last but not least is grapes. Grapes are a climbing vine. They need a lot of sun and as much heat as you can give them in order to get ripe fruit here in Calgary. They are super versatile in terms of eating. They're great fresh. The varieties that grow here, good for juice, jelly, baking, and don't forget about us winemakers. They're fantastic for wine, the varieties that grow here. So things to note about grapes. They require a very strong trellis. They have thick, woody stems, so they need a really strong trellis in order to support them. The other thing about grapes is that they must be pruned every year. Okay, so if you're not prepared to put in some pruning work, grapes are not for you. There's a few reasons we prune grapes every year. One is that fruit happens only on new first-year wood. So we prune back our vines in order to stimulate new growth, and it's on that new growth that grapes are formed. The other reason we do a lot of pruning with grapes is we really want to get air through the vines, so it makes it less dense, allowing air to get through. That reduces the incidence of diseases and mold and mildew. And it also lets sunlight into all of the fruit, okay? That fruit needs lots of sunlight and heat in order to ripen in our short season. A couple other things to note about grapes. They do need a decent amount of water, especially when fruit is ripening on the vine, but they really dislike standing water. So make sure you have really well-drained soil for the roots. Another thing about those roots is they are pretty big. They have really large root systems that can interfere with foundations, okay? So best not to plant grapes right up against your house, right beside the foundation. Better to put them a few feet back so that they don't interfere with the concrete. Okay, if you have a spot in your yard that gets super sun-baked, is really, really hot in the summer, is the perfect place for grapes. A nice arbor or a pergola is fantastic for grapes to grow up. All right, so grapes are self-fertile, so you only need one plant. Okay, They are also wind pollinated. So if you live in an area that has a very low number of insect pollinators, grapes are something you should be thinking about. Okay, they're usually sold as a graft onto hardy rootstock. That's wild grapes are usually the rootstock, and then a really good tasting variety is grafted onto that root. That means that when we plant them, we need to make sure we plant them at the same level they were at when we got them from the nursery. If we plant them too deep, our rootstock is going to form, it's going to send up shoots. Okay, and those aren't going to taste very good. We only want our good tasting variety that's grafted on to be giving us fruit. All right, there's many new varieties being tested for our zone right now, so keep an eye out for new ones in the future. As of right now, almost all of them have seeds. Okay, so all three of these that are common and do well here do have seeds. But like I said, keep an eye out for new varieties that are coming. Valiant, our first one here, is the variety that's been grown in Calgary for many, many years for good reason. It's really easy to grow and very reliable here in Calgary. It produces blue fruit that are about pea-sized, and as I mentioned, they do have seeds. Beta is slightly larger than the Valiant, same color, blue fruit, and once again has seeds. Frontenac is a little bit more recent variety. It has dark red fruit with seeds and is really good, has a lot of fruit production. All right, so that's it for our series on growing fruit here in Calgary. I hope you learned something. I hope I inspired you to grow some fruit and try out the many, many varieties that we have that do fantastic here in our Calgary climate. Don't forget that we grow fruit trees, shrubs, and brambles, and vines, and ground fruit, not only to give us fruit, but also because they are in their own right beautiful landscape plants. If we have so much fruit in our yard that we cannot enjoy it all ourselves, keep in mind that gardeners are fantastic sharers, and we like to share with friends and family. But don't forget about the food bank. They always appreciate fresh produce as well. If you happen to have so much fruit that you can't possibly pick it yourself, take a look at Calgary Harvest. They can help make sure that that fruit does not go to waste. All right. So I want to say thank you for watching. It was great having you listening today and to my previous two videos. That's it for me. Happy, yummy gardening, everybody.